to N-Square, Nerski's Netcast.
Hello, and welcome to N-Square Nerski's Netcast, Episode 2. I, as always, will be your host for these episodes, Ken Nerski. And today we are going to be looking at Blizzard's new maps, specifically the new maps that are on the test server. So while these new maps may not be going actually onto the game as is, if at all, depending on the feedback that they have received from the community, I have been checking out the community, things people have been saying both on sites like Team Liquid and the SC2 forums, wherever I could actually find any information about the new maps, as well as my own experience playing on them on the test server a little bit and looking at them. I'm going to basically take that information that I got as well as my own information and give you kind of what I feel like is my overall feedback on the maps based on what I've seen and what I've seen in the community about the maps. So without waiting too long here, we're going to jump right into the maps and get looking at them. So as you can see, I've already loaded up map number 1, which is going to be this Lost Temple remake, and I'm actually going to back up the time just for a second because I want to get rid of the little sound disabled things here. There we go. Alright, so test map number 1. As you can see, it's going to be a very familiar map, and that is because it is a remake of Lost Temple, and a good remake in my opinion. This is one of the top 2 maps, in my opinion, of the entire 5-map test pool that they had up. So I'm going to shrink this a little bit just so that it's not taking up as much space. Really don't care if we can see it. I'm not doing a game cast. So here's the new Lost Temple. As you can see, there's still 4 starting locations. You have one in the 12 o'clock, one in the 3 o'clock, one at 6 o'clock, and of course one at the 9 o'clock position. The first big change that you'll notice is with the Xel'Naga towers. There's now only one central Xel'Naga tower in the middle of the map, as you can see on the mini-map here. You get a pretty decent view. You can see all this area that is now the new center of the map. Biggest changes to the center of the map, as I'm sure you noticed already, is that it is much more wide open. This whole area just has a lot more openness. There's a lot less structures in the middle here. There's still some crevices on the edges, and there are still some cliffs on the edges of the center area. But it's definitely a lot more open than it was before. Also, as you can see, those 2 side Xel'Naga towers that each player used to try and control are gone. So just kind of like, I think, a general overall good feeling change from that respect. One of the biggest notable changes as far as balance goes on the map, though, besides maybe the slight balance tweaks that this open space in the middle is going to give you, is going to be the changes to the naturals. As you can see, the first thing you're going to notice is that large cliff that used to overhang in this kind of general area over here, that used to kind of wrap up and over here, is now gone. The cliff is no more, which will make, in some respects, Protoss players, but especially Zerg players, extremely happy just because of the way tech timings sync up in the game. Terran obviously tends to tech the fastest. Protoss is kind of a close second, and then Zerg's definitely a distant third in tech timings. So it used to be pretty well, I don't know if I want to say abused, but definitely in ways abused by the fact that Terrans could drop onto this cliff long before Zerg, or even in some cases Protoss, depending on positions, could really deal with it, which made holding this natural position extremely difficult. So that cliff is now gone. And the other change that they've made is instead of having the cliff there, you now have this kind of open, I don't know what you would call it, but just like a flat extension of your natural, which leads to some destructible rocks and a pretty decent sized ramp. And now they've gotten rid of the island expansion in the sense that it's not an island anymore, not a pure island. It's kind of like a pseudo island, and is now connected to the natural here and the natural enclosed positions with 2 sets of destructible rocks. So now this island expansion is now just a plateau with destructible rocks that connects the 2 close position expansions. And this is also the same, obviously, on both sides of the map, as you can see. As far as the rest of the map goes, the gold bases are still in the same locations that they were before, in between the 2 close position spawns. Close air is still about the same distance from here to here. The gap might be a little bit different, but it's about the same, so you still would have to worry about drops and close air setups pretty much about the same as you would have before. I think overall, because of these changes though, I think while Terran may not be happy that they can't use that drop advantage anymore on this map, I think the map overall will play out much, much, much better. Not just because of the dropping that used to happen here, but also now Protoss and Zerg alike don't actually have to tech to either Warp Prisms or Overlord drops to potentially take this base, which while in close positions, when I'm here, we're looking at it from the point of view of where I spawned, and my opponent's here, sure, the gold's still going to be nar impossible to take for Zerg or Protoss against Terran, say, or even against each other, and this base would be extremely difficult to take. But in any of the other positions, whether it be close air or cross positions, it's going to make this base a much more viable base to take, a much easier base to take as well as an easier base to prevent your opponent from taking. Zerg doesn't necessarily have to have air units to prevent Terran from floating a command center over there, or Protoss from using Warp Prisms to get a base over there, and likewise, Terran or Protoss doesn't need to have air units to get to that base as well. So you can't really turtle on one of these island expansions anymore to try and hold off in the game. So rush distances are all still about the same though. They don't really change anything like that. Close positions are still going to be extremely close by ground from natural to natural. That distance really hasn't changed. The ability to wall off this area is still about the same for Protoss and Terran. So that's going to be all approximately about the way it was. It's a little different, but not significantly different, to the point where it's going to be impossible to do. I mean, you can obviously see it is a bit more open than it was before. There's been some concern about the fact that Blizzard has seemed to follow a pattern of having a bit of a gimmick, and I'm only going to mention it on this map, and I'm going to just briefly touch on it on the other maps. Blizzard tends to have a gimmick on every map, whether it's backdoor entrance into your main, like a Blistering Sands or Shakir's Plateau, stuff like that. People have felt like every map has a gimmick. Well, the overall gimmick, I would say, in these maps, and it's the only kind of disappointing thing about the maps for some players. I don't necessarily think it's going to be bad, but it makes players feel a little uncertain about the maps, is that every natural in these set of 5 map pool has 2 entrances to it. In this case, if regardless of positions, your opponent potentially could knock down both sets of backdoor or destructible rocks, not really backdoor, but destructible rocks, to open up a new entrance into this natural, or they can come from the front of the natural. And every map's going to have that basic feel, basically, where there's 2 entrances to your natural. I think particularly on this map, whether it's bunkers over here, spine crawlers over here, or cannons over here, you'll be able to defend this area in time. It's going to take a while to work through 2 sets of destructible rocks. It's not going to be something that happens fast. And Colossus and tanks, which are, or even Broodlords, I guess, which are some of the longest range units in the game, can't really sit on this particular cliff and hit your natural very well. So it's not like they're going to be able to just camp up on here where you have this narrow choke and obliterate your natural. They're going to have to push down into this more open flat area to attack you. So I don't think it's going to be a huge problem on this particular map. I'm sure some Terran and Protoss aren't going to be happy about the fact that this is a little bit wider distance now, so it's not quite as easy to wall in. Obviously, like just 3 bunkers, or not 3 bunkers, 3 barracks for Terran, or like 3 warp gates for Protoss aren't going to really effectively block this off anymore. You're probably going to have to see more bunkers or something used if this map goes into the pool. But overall, I think the map is much more playable and much more balanced like this. So I think, all in all, it's got a pretty darn good feel to it. So now we're going to actually come back to the webcam for a second here, because I have to exit StarCraft 2 and then re-enter StarCraft 2 to bring up the maps. The test server's down or something right now. So I'm using the actual retail version of StarCraft to launch the replays that I have saved. Thankfully, the versions are compatible enough that I can do that. open. So that's a good thing. We're happy about that because I couldn't record this episode if I couldn't open these replays. But I do have to log back in every single time to switch maps, so slight delay. A little more of a delay than I'd like. So now as this is loading up, I'm going to times 8 this really quick because I basically just was getting free wins, which we love free wins, right? Nah, it doesn't matter, it's test server. But it's just running AI games with no AI. So I can just bust out some probes and pylons and easily reveal the whole map to you guys. So here's test map number 2. Test map number 2 has 4 starting locations once again. Top right, bottom left, and top left. First thing you're going to notice is this one actually does have 2 Xel'Naga towers. One located here and one located here in the center of the map, which is a little bit of a choke distance, but I'll explain in a minute why that's not as big of a deal as you'd think it'd be. There is some cliffs up here next to the Xel'Naga towers, so having stuff like tanks up on here, or, you know, if you have a Colossus or something and you use that cliff walk ability, or drops even from any of the races, could help you to potentially hold this center area a little bit. But I don't think that'll be as big of a deal, because if you look at the vertical positions, so let's say top right and bottom right, from their naturals, and you're going to see as you come through your main here, you got this big, nice main. It's actually, I'd say, decent enough size, lots of room for buildings. Down to your natural. You could go left into this middle area where the Xel'Naga towers can see everything, or once you're ready to, there's a large ramp here. Then there's a set of destructible rocks, and another large ramp up into the other spawn's natural. So back with that theme of multiple entrances into the natural. So if, say, you weren't in these vertical spawns, say you're in cross positions, or I suppose even in the horizontal positions, if you don't want your opponent, if they maybe do have control of these Xel'Naga towers and stuff like tanks up here, and you don't want to use this area because you feel like you're going to get obliterated in it, you do have these secondary paths that you can go through. Now, one of the worries of a lot of players on this map is that in the vertical positions as such, say I'm here and my opponent's down here, is that especially the Zerg players, and to some extent the Protoss players, are worried about stuff like tank pushes or fast pushes through these rocks, since everybody knows that Zerg, especially with their slower tech timing, needs distance, and Protoss with their slightly, compared to Terran, I'd say, typically a little delayed tech, whether it be, you know, not having enough stuff to really deal with concussive shell or whatever, would worry about these rocks a little more, because this makes this distance from natural to natural extremely short. I think the way to design the map might actually not be too bad for players, and I'll tell you why. This ramp is rather large. So in, say, a ZVT, Terran aren't going to be able to set like a tank here and a tank here and run Marines up this ramp with no threat of Banelings or Zerglings or anything like that, because they're going to be bottled up in a narrow troke, which is the problem you get on Shakira's Plateau. With those tank pushes through the back of the mains for Zerg. It's wide open enough that it'd be a lot harder to sit on the bottom of this ramp and actually hold it. I mean, obviously you can still potentially hold it, but with this wide open area, there's a lot more room for Zerg to work stuff like Banelings and stuff like that, or for, you know, stuff like Mutalisks to pick stuff off. Likewise with Protoss or Terran, who might be worried about, you know, Zerg or the other race exploiting this secondary entrance into their natural. It's still a ramp, and there still is, in some respects, a narrower choke in the center of the ramp. So, you know, a bunker, you know, even a bunker or even 2 bunkers near the top of the ramp are going to do a lot to harden the position. So if you were really worried about a push coming through here, you know, you might have 2 bunkers here, and you might have to end up having another 2 bunkers, you know, somewhere over here, or maybe your army over here, and then like a bunker or 2 down here just in case. You're going to have to play a little more defensively, I'd say, on these maps than people are used to if you're not being the aggressor, if you've lost map control to an extent. But I don't think that's going to be a huge problem, but, you know, we'll